Mount Suribachi rises only 169 meters above sea level, but in February 1945 it was the most feared piece of ground in the Pacific. From its volcanic slopes, Japanese observers could see every movement on the beaches below. Artillery spotters used its commanding height to direct fire onto the Marines as they struggled through the black sand. To the Americans storming Iwo Jima, Suribachi was not just a hill, it was a fortress, a fire-breathing monster whose gaze could kill. Every ship, every landing craft, every platoon that set foot on the southern beaches of Iwo Jima did so under the shadow of that cone. The Marines knew that until the volcano fell, no one on the island would be safe. The Japanese had transformed Suribachi into a honeycomb of death. Dozens of artillery pieces were dug into the slopes, hidden in caves with narrow firing ports. Machine guns and mortars were concealed behind rock walls and camouflage nets. Inside the mountain, engineers had carved tunnels connecting bunkers, allowing troops to emerge unexpectedly, fire, and vanish back underground. General Kuribayashi understood that Suribachi was both symbol and weapon. If it held, it would bleed the Marines and perhaps stall their momentum long enough to discourage further assaults on the home islands. If it fell, the psychological blow to his defenders would be immense. He ordered his men to fight for every inch of the mountain. For the Marines of the 5th Division, the assignment was clear: take Suribachi, no matter the cost. The order came after 2 days of withering fire from its slopes that threatened to choke the invasion at the beaches. Men who had survived the landing described the mountain as an evil eye glaring down on them. Tanks that tried to advance near its base were destroyed by hidden guns. Troops attempting to flank the volcano were cut down by crossfire. Suribachi was a citadel, and the Marines would have to climb into its jaws. They prepared with flamethrowers, satchel charges, and grenades, weapons designed for the brutal work of rooting defenders out of rock and concrete. The assault began with artillery barrages from ships and bombardment from aircraft, but the defenders remained hidden, waiting. When the Marines advanced up the slopes, the volcano exploded into life. Machine guns swept the ridges, mortars rained down, and the ground shook from hidden charges. Men clawed at the loose ash and rock, desperately seeking cover where none existed. Progress was measured in feet, each one won by fire and blood. For the men pinned to its slopes, Mount Suribachi became more than a hill. It was a mountain of fire and glory, where courage was tested and survival was never guaranteed. The Marines who moved against Mount Suribachi quickly learned that this was no ordinary hill to climb. It was a fortress built from rock and fire. Every slope was scarred with cave mouths and firing slits that seemed invisible until they spat flame and bullets. The Japanese had dug deeply into the mountain, creating a honeycomb of interconnected chambers, each one capable of holding out even after days of bombardment. Flamethrowers and explosives became the weapons of choice, but even these often felt inadequate against defenders who vanished into tunnels, only to reappear behind American lines. The fight up Suribachi was measured bunker by bunker, hour by hour, with each small victory costing lives. The Marines relied on teamwork and improvisation. Rifle squads advanced behind flamethrower operators, who were often prime targets for Japanese snipers. Engineers carried satchel charges weighing over 30 pounds, sprinting under fire to blast open cave mouths before collapsing in exhaustion. Corpsmen crawled through volcanic ash to reach the wounded, dragging them to makeshift aid stations under tarps that shuddered with every impact of enemy shells. Progress was painfully slow. A single machine gun nest could pin down an entire company until someone crawled close enough to silence it with fire or grenades. The men came to call Suribachi the meat grinder, a place where bravery was demanded in doses no human should have been asked to give. Japanese resistance was as disciplined as it was suicidal. General Kuribayashi's orders were clear: inflict maximum casualties, buy every hour of delay, and never waste lives in reckless charges. The defenders obeyed. They fought from hidden positions, often waiting until Marines passed by before opening fire from behind. They used smoke and dust to mask their movements, emerging from unexpected exits to throw grenades or launch bayonet attacks. Each fallback was planned, each death part of a strategy designed to sap American strength. For the Marines, there was no rest, no safe ground, only the grinding realization that every step upward would be contested. And yet, through exhaustion and horror, the Marines climbed. They crawled on hands and knees, dug foxholes in the loose volcanic ash, and returned again and again to clear the next bunker. By the third day of fighting, the slopes were a wasteland of burned rock, shattered weapons, and bodies half buried in ash. Still, the flag never left their minds. Taking Suribachi was not just about eliminating a deadly observation post. It was about morale, both for the men on the island and for the nation watching from afar. The order was relentless. Suribachi must fall, and the Marines pressed forward with grim determination, knowing the summit was near, but the blood toll still rising. On the morning of February 23, 1945, after 4 days of relentless fighting, a patrol from the 28th Marines began the final push toward Suribachi's summit. The slopes were scarred, littered with the wreckage of flamethrowers, spent cartridges, and the silent forms of men who had fallen. The air reeked of sulfur and smoke, carrying the echo of explosions from caves still being cleared by squads far below. As the patrol advanced, tension gripped every step. Would the defenders mount one last desperate counterattack? Would hidden guns cut them down just before the peak? But as the Marines neared the crater rim, resistance slackened. The Japanese still fought below ground, but the crest itself lay within reach. With weapons ready and hearts pounding, the men climbed onto the summit of a mountain that had become a symbol of death and endurance. At 10:20 a.m., the first flag was raised. Small, barely visible from the beaches, it nonetheless unleashed a roar of jubilation from thousands of Marines pinned on the sands below. Men cheered, ships blasted horns, and for a fleeting moment, the battlefield transformed. The sight of the stars and stripes flying over Suribachi told every Marine that the nightmare of those beaches could be endured, that victory, however costly, was possible. Some wept openly, others grinned despite the fire still raging around them. The mountain that had looked invincible now bore the mark of American resolve. Yet the battle was not over, and the war was certainly not won. Later that afternoon, a larger flag was carried up to replace the first. As the Marines struggled to plant the heavier standard, Associated Press photographer Joe Rosenthal snapped his iconic image, the picture that would become immortalized as the raising of the flag on Iwo Jima. That single frame captured a truth deeper than the moment itself. Men straining together, unified in purpose, defying exhaustion, planting hope in the volcanic ash. Within hours, the image was racing across the world, destined to become the most reproduced photograph of World War II. It was hailed as the symbol of Marine grit, American unity, and inevitable victory. For the men who were there, however, it was simply a fleeting pause, a breath before the storm resumed. Because even as flags rose over Suribachi, the northern half of Iwo Jima remained a fortress of tunnels and guns. The cheers could not drown the screams of the wounded still being carried off the black sands. Medics still bent over bodies torn by shrapnel, and stretcher teams still risked fire to haul comrades to safety. Suribachi was a victory, but it was only the first act in a tragedy still unfolding. For the Marines who fought there, the summit was not the end of their ordeal, it was a spark of glory on a hill of fire. When Suribachi finally fell, it was more than a tactical victory. The mountain had been the eye of the storm, the perch from which Japanese gunners had rained death onto the beaches. With the summit secured, American forces could move supplies inland with greater safety, and the psychological stranglehold of the volcano was broken. For the Marines who had fought up its slopes, the moment carried a weight beyond strategy. They had faced fire from every angle, clawed through ash and rock, and burned bunkers into silence. To see the flag above Suribachi was to see proof that survival was possible, that sacrifice had meaning. Yet the men also knew the battle for Iwo Jima was far from finished. As they looked north, the ridges and tunnels still held thousands of defenders ready to make every advance a new ordeal. Suribachi was a victory, but it was only one step in a path paved with blood. Back in the United States, the fall of Suribachi became a symbol that resonated instantly. Newspapers printed Joe Rosenthal's photograph as if it captured the end of the war itself. Politicians praised the image as proof of Marine invincibility. The government seized upon the flag raising as the centerpiece of the 7th War Loan Drive, parading surviving flag raisers through cities and stadiums to inspire the sale of billions in bonds. For a weary public, the picture offered hope, a clear vision of victory rising from the volcanic ash of the Pacific. Few realized that on Iwo Jima itself, the worst of the battle had not yet been fought. The duality of Suribachi, the reality of blood and the myth of glory, became part of its enduring legacy. To Marines, it was remembered as a crucible of courage, a place where every yard had been earned by fire and grit. To the American people, it became the defining icon of triumph, immortalized in bronze at the Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington. For historians, it represents the tension between truth and symbol, a photograph that galvanized a nation while concealing the unfinished agony of a battle still raging. The mountain itself, blackened by fire and scarred by explosions, remained a silent witness to both the human cost and the human spirit. Today, Suribachi is more than a hill on a remote island. It is a chapter in the Marine Corps' story, a place where valor was common and survival uncertain. The flag atop its summit was not the end of the war, nor the end of the suffering, but it was a moment of defiance carved from volcanic rock. Suribachi became the hill of fire and glory because it proved that even in the most unforgiving ground, men could rise together, raise a flag, and remind the world that hope can stand where death once ruled.